welcome to Plow and Potato. I'm Sean Bonet.
I'm Joffrey Swait.
We are coming to you live, high above Moscow, in the Spud Pub.
Welcome to the big show.
Big show indeed. Today we're going to be talking about how to not have a narrow view of masculinity.
And why that's going to be helpful for you, because I think it's often easy for us men, as we are striving to be manly, to gladly assume responsibility. It's easy for us to end up developing a narrow view because we're striving toward a thing and it becomes a point. And when you do that, you're going to end up hurting the people around you, particularly your wife and your children.
I like that we are framing this discussion we're embarking on as not having a narrow view, because there's ways we can talk about masculinity or any goal that we're trying to seek as we don't want to do it in this way or in this manner. And it can seem as if there's no standard or guards to follow,
right?
Which is not what we're saying.
No, of course not. And I think that one, I mean, we're gonna be quite broad in today's discussion and an outlook and trying to define things really broad. So let's just start right away with that. One of the ways to really look at masculinity, we understand what a man is and what a woman is. We walk into the correct bathrooms,
right?
And so even having this conversation, one of the reasons we end up with these very fine and very defined definitions of masculinity is because of the fights that we're in. Mm-hmm. But we can't fall prey to that temptation.
Yeah.
And so, what we end up with is someone who is lost on this point because he was thinking about boy and girl bathrooms. Right. My point was that, like that definition of what pornography is as opposed to art. I forget which politician said this, but he was asked what pornography was. And he said, I can't define it for you, but I know it when I see it. Mm. And that, I think, should be the primary way we look at masculinity. I know it when I see it. I recognize that. That's manly. Oh, and that's manly too.
Yeah.
Right? And we can also recognize when we see it, that's effeminate.
Yeah.
That's, for a man to be that way is sinful. But we don't have to have this monad manliness that we're trying to achieve.
It's a fascinating definition because it's more of a free-form definition and a definition that calls you to be consuming a certain worldview and context and where you're at, where other people are at, in order to make these very subjective, objective conclusions. You have to be consuming information and instruction on masculinity from the scriptures themselves so that you are receiving these baseline distinctions.
Right.
Man's doing this, woman's doing this, here, simple basics, building blocks. And then above that, you look in culture in ways that this is manifested. We talked about this in our biblical masculinity episode, where we were assigning men, make sure you do this. You should drive most often. You should be doing the more dangerous things, not necessarily the most labor intensive.
Right.
We got, women working in fields and whatnot.
We were doing that without telling, the men. Someone once told me, they were talking about something else, but they once said to me that the man should drive every single time.
Yeah.
In every single relationship. What are you doing? That's just a weird list of manly things to make.
Yeah. And that would,
but we're always doing the dangerous things.
Yeah, and that would fit into the idea that masculinity too narrow.
Yeah.
Especially when you get into these superlative type things, or whether they be talking about a state of always and forever or never. They should always be that. That's kind of like a red flag if it's not concerning some of these basic foundational blocks about masculinity.
Yeah.
So what are some common ways in which we see masculinity too narrow? What are some images, practices that we tend to cling to too firmly that we should maybe relax a bit?
Yeah, well, I think that, a lot of these are things that men would recognize that in isolation they may be sinful, or recognize it'd be easy to get carried away with them, and yet they still end up being things we strive for. So, one, for example, I think, is physical strength. That's an obvious one.
You have to bench at least 135.
Sure, right. Yeah. And
put a plate on.
And the fact is that lots of manly men are strong.
Yeah.
And that's very good. Physically strong.
Mm-hmm.
That's very good. But, Christians ought to feel comfortable with their many builds and their many outlooks on life and their many interests. And if you can be utterly manly and be a Tolkien scholar who's kind of nearsighted because he does so much reading,
mm-hmm.
and you're taking care of your family, and you're being there, I think that often what we do is we strive towards aggression and the ability to be aggressive, right? And we fail to think about manliness in community, and we fail to think about, well, men garden, men cultivate.
Mm-hmm.
If all I'm ever doing is training for a fight, that may be what the calling is in that, in that moment, or that's what my life needs to be like.
This present time.
But then to tell other men that that's what they need to be like is something else.
Yeah, it's the standard of seeing the ideal man as warrior, barbarian, the guy who was at the Republican, Capitol with his horns and his furry vest.
I don't know how manly that dude was.
You know what? As far in terms of ideals, I think we could hold that guy up to society and say, man, you should be more like this guy. I think if we do that, we'd be going in a better way. Maybe not the right way, but a better way.
Well, that actually kind of, I think brings up the idea that men ought to be willing to be ridiculous or even made ridiculous. You're not trying to do that,
mm-hmm.
but basically, I guess one of my encouragements for men today is give less of a fig, give less of a toss, and because people are going around telling other men how to be men and how to behave, and here we are making a podcast about manliness, right? So it's this line we have to walk. We must be free men who freely submit, but also recognizing that no one has the authority to tell us how to be men. We look at Scripture, we take care of our families, and we're going to take care of our families in diverse ways.
Let's talk about that very idea of free men, where we freely submit, but then we also don't receive all authority like full mouth open. Let's talk about the ways first in which, what are the things we must submit to? We've been alluding to there's some things you've got to do. What are the things that are the non-negotiables of men?
Well, I think it's really important to understand, I'll just use the phrase fear sovereignty,
okay.
Right? Or we could talk about the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, just understanding that authority is always limited, unless it's God's authority, right? And understanding what those limitations are, even understanding what our own, the limitations to our own authority are. And, eventually in this conversation, we're going to get to how, when we have authority, how we ought to manage that.
Yeah.
Right. But so I think one of the biggest aspects of being a man is saying this far and no farther. Right. So yes, we are going to submit to our pastor. I'm going to lead my family in submitting to our elders.
Yes.
And then the elders say, everybody wear a mask at worship. And you say, no farther.
Right.
Right?
No, you're right.
That's right. Exactly. It's not, this, I have to take care of my family right now. And if someone says to you, real men submit to their session, you say, real men don't try to force fathers to dehumanize their children, right? You have to fight back sometimes.
Yep.
And, I'm not saying, I'm not calling for a general rebellion at all. I say quite the contrary. I'm saying that we need to love authority and love right authority.
You're starting to make a nice distinction, because we are submitting to pastors, elders, and sessions over us. And there's in many different ways in which we will submit, even if we have a different idea or preference. But there requires the discernment when that line is crossed. Dehumanization. all of a sudden we're getting into areas where you're breaking down the Imago Dei in such a way where it's like, nope, we can't do that. And so that is violating the holy command of God.
Yeah, that's right. And so the dignity of your wife and children is part of your purview in protecting their dignity and their honor. And really, this even comes into self-defense, right? So we as men should only defend ourselves when it's for the sake of our family.
Okay. And
that can include dignity. So all of the stuff we're talking about requires wisdom and discernment.
Yeah.
Right? It's, there are a lot of men out there who say they submit to their elders, but don't.
Okay.
And they say they're protecting their family. But if you look at their lives, you can tell they don't want to ever submit. Right? So we have to constantly be wise and observe people's walks, observe our own walks. But if we think about self-defense, if some guy random guy walks up to you on the street, smacks you and runs on, you don't have to chase him down.
Nope.
Yes, it's fine. I've only been in one fight as an adult. And
as an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed by it. It was one of my unmanliest episodes in my life.
Were you slapping?
No, come on.
Okay. I just didn't know how gay you got.
And I won the fight, for the record. Okay.
Chopper's like, all right, it was shameful, but let me set a few things straight. I made a fist and I beat him up.
But I'm embarrassed thinking about it now. It should never have happened. And even though the other guy struck first, I was a part of making that fight happen. And I'm embarrassed thinking about it now. It should never have happened. But the reason it should never have happened was it was about me. The guy stepped onto my basketball court and misbehaved. So I punked him and punked him and punked him until he hit me.
Yeah.
And I should not have done that.
Right.
It's not my basketball court and it's not my honor. Like, it doesn't matter. But there are times when it happens that if I get shamed in this way, or someone manages to take me down this way, it's going to affect my family, or it's going to affect my church.
Yep.
And so I must defend myself. But even when you're defending yourself, it has to be about other people.
Exactly.
We're not really concerned about our own honor and dignity.
Yeah. Before we move on from the idea of protecting in the right way, I also have a story that I think is worth telling. I've never been in a fight in my adult career, but I've been in many fights as a youth, very rascal individual. And I've been in a fight over ketchup before. That's right.
That's embarrassing.
That is kind of embarrassing. So it was high school.
Yeah.
Guy's coming in with a package of ketchup. Looks like he's about to dump it on me. And I slap it out of his hand, escalate the situation.
How dare you, sir?
Yeah, how dare you threaten me with that ketchup? I also won that fight, for the record.
I love that you just had to work that in so everyone knows. We're both winners, guys.
Just so I've been in a fight too. It was embarrassing, but I also won. Okay. So we've got knowing proper spheres of authority, when to stand against authority. We've got protection. I think it's fascinating. You started with these broad and very kind of mature marks of a man. First, when we're talking about...
I'm afraid of how you use the word mature, but go on.
Okay.
I feel like you're about to make fun of my age.
No. But even just the basics of what being a man is that are often the starting places in a lot of conversations, especially in our day, which is like a man marries a woman, right? And you've mentioned, it's like the obvious ones.
Yeah.
A man uses the men's restroom, right?
Right.
A man doesn't cultivate very close friendships with women in his life.
Right.
That are not
because he loves
sisters.
His wife and her dignity.
Exactly. So these are just like a few. What are some other basic, overlooked, but yet key characteristics in that regard?
Well, I think that we see that every man mentors. So every man mentors, every man disciples, every man works, every man converses.
Yeah,
that might not be one that we always think of. But I guess I could continue building a list, but I don't want to.
Okay.
It's we need to keep that aspect of things broad. Like
Exactly.
I know it when I see it.
Well, and that's the transition point. Here are the things we can point on, do this, make it like this. But now we start getting into this area where there's flexibility.
Yeah.
And there's room for right diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion within masculinity.
Right.
Maybe that'll be the title of this show.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I honestly think that that we need to bring the nerds with undeveloped pectoral muscles into this. We need to bring the people. We need to bring people with great education and low education into this. We need to bring people with high entrepreneurial spirit and people with low entrepreneurial spirit into this. We need to bring
men who like to dress well and men who like to dress like they're in 1890.
That's right. Well, or even like it's
men who read GQ and
well, there are guys out there who like to project the idea that not giving a toss about your clothes is manly.
Yeah.
Right.
Some ketchup on the shorts, no big deal.
But
it was from that fight I was in.
and maybe someone that you would call a dandy is being quite masculine. Maybe liking good shoes, which I don't care about, but liking good shoes can be a part of being a man, and that's fine.
And the thing is like, let's take the shoe idea. Typically, if you are more of a pretty boy,
nice shoes, by the way.
I know,
and nice socks.
Hey, shout out to Thomas
you're
Carpenter
the pretty boy in this
for shining these shoes. Find him on Kirkerman Hill. He'll give you a good deal, and with my colorful socks.
Dude, Thomas Carpenter did work for me too. He's good with leather.
Mm-hmm. These are leather.
They're nice shoes, dude.
That's why he made them nice. When you've got a pretty boys, they tend to the stereotype is they care about their appearance or the things they own at the expense of a proper temperament or the others they're with.
Right.
So it's not.
It's because we some of us categorize caring about your appearance as feminine, or at least certain. We'll say you can work out. Like you can care about how big your chest is.
Yeah.
But you can't care about how nice your slacks are.
Right. And the issue is that's like, have the nice pecs, go to the gym 5 days a week, shine your shoes, maybe get that ketchup off of your shorts. Men.
And
wipe your nose off a little bit. But don't, if someone steps on your shoes, that's like your kid playing, don't explode in such a way as that preserving this is the most important thing that you must do. That if the image is tainted in any way from your ideal because of living life in community with your family and church, to explode in such a way or to get angry, that's when the line is crossed.
The dandy and the roid rager need to respect each other.
Yeah.
Right. I would like to talk about mentorship.
Okay.
And leadership, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because this applies directly to how we lead our wives and how we raise our children.
Okay.
Right? Particularly our sons, but how we raise our children. And so we've been talking about freedom, about limitations in authority. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important, and I wonder how you'd interact with this, for men to lead broadly. Yeah. To, if you're teaching a technique, that's one thing, right? Here's how to perform such and such a task.
Yeah.
Step A, step B, step C. Okay.
Yeah, like you must do it in this way, be methodical, be precise.
This is how it happens. And maybe when the person becomes a master of that process, he develops a new technique. Right. But there's certain things you need to teach methodically. But when you lead, that ought to be, I think, very open.
Yeah.
Right? It ought to be, this is what you need to achieve. Go achieve it. And not the, first this step, then that step, then that step. At that point, you're treating that person like a slave, like a robot.
Exactly.
Right? And as the person is maturing into manliness, there ought to be lots of freedom. And part of learning to assume that freedom is being given that freedom. It's not simply that we have to kind of take freedom for ourselves and make sure that our liberty is protected where it needs to be protected, but also that as we lead, we're protecting the liberty of others.
Exactly.
Right. So we've been working together, and we're doing this thing. So I'm coaching you in basketball, and this is how we're going to need to run things. How can you make that happen? not
Yes.
first step A, then step B.
Right. And that's the exact thing. As a leader, the ideal way to lead in a manly way is to give the achievement points. This is what you need to do. You need to, get the ball in the basket. With basketball, it might be a little bit different because there's a technique that should be followed.
Well, like shooting.
Yeah.
It's there. You have to learn how to shoot, and it's quite technical.
Yeah. Well, even in shooting, what's fascinating is it's something that is quite technical, yet there can be right variation. So let's say in the initial stage, you're telling these are some basic principles that will, for the most part, for the most people, create an efficient, consistent shot.
Yeah.
Well, you get in and there's struggle, it's not really connecting, but maybe they do this weird thing. Maybe the elbow is actually just a little bit jetted, but they make it every time, or there's more consistency. You have to begin to discern, is that an instance where we need to modify in order for success?
Right.
Or is this them being lazy and making excuses?
Right.
That takes leadership discernment.
Yes, that's right. Discernment is wonderful. Wisdom. That's right. Because there are some great shooters who do things wonkily, but you also see good shooters made better. And someone had the courage to say, no, like, we're going to have to drill this out of you.
You need to stop doing it this way. I know this is the better way.
And then there has to be that mutual trust.
Right.
And that mutuality is important. And if you are being, I suppose, oppressive in your leadership, the mutuality goes away.
Right.
You're simply developing an executor.
Yeah.
Right. So ultimately, there are men who are leaders who call on other men to be simple executors.
Yes.
Right. And sometimes it just has to be done. It depends on the task. Right. So we need to get this squad to up that hill. Let's execute that. We're going to go through these steps, and that's how it's going to be. But if what we're doing is living in community with other men, and these other men I am thinking of as better than myself, as Scripture instructs, then we need to foster the ability for them to make these decisions and to be free.
And exactly how you're describing that new angle is how not to have a narrow view. We can't just be the leaders, the manly leaders that say, you must do it in this way, robot. You also can't be fully the leader who says, all right, guys,
do whatever.
Just get it done by this time.
Yeah.
It's a mix of both, where you are ultimately, there's that general, here's the achievement, here's your time frame.
Yeah.
As those who are under you, recognizing the hierarchy, you are knowing how to best get them to achievement and the goal. So let's talk about, and bringing this home, some of the practical implications. In what way should men and women live differently by knowing that masculinity should not be taken on in such a narrow view?
Well, I think that, if we think about our sons, that'll really help sharpen how we think about our relationships with other men as well. And so, we don't want our sons to be carbon copies of us. Even if we think we're awesome.
That's right. Even if it would be really great for them if they would.
Right. We need, and a lot of our listeners have multiple children, and they see how each of their kids is different, and how each of their sons is different,
and like them.
Right. Yeah, and exactly. And
for better or for worse.
It's easy to, even if we haven't formulated it that way, to kind of hold either ourselves up as a standard or some abstract ideal that we know we failed to hit as a standard. But God made each of our sons in a particular way. And what we ought to be doing is trying to recognize what that is and foster that into manhood.
Yes.
Right? And so it definitely, it takes wisdom. And we've all been, all of us have been, of course, deeply influenced by our fathers. And in an age of confused masculinity, it can be quite difficult. There are a lot of people out there who didn't have fathers. I think of my own father. I wish he had taken a heavier hand in my life. He was there every day. We had dinner together, but he never gave me his opinion, or at least I never absorbed it, about what he wanted for me. right?
Yes.
And there are so many men who are on the other side of that.
Exactly.
Where their dad's just like, you're going to be a doctor, and that's it, right? That's what it's going to be. So you're going to study X, then you're going to study Y, and you're going to execute my plan for your life. My dad was the complete opposite of that. Son, you can do whatever you want. But then he was disappointed when I wasn't an engineer. And I would have liked to have known that was what he wanted for me. Yeah. So that I could then grow into manliness and say, no, I'm going to do such and such. Yeah. And of course that what I'm just telling you exists in a context of me being sinful and, et cetera. Right. So it's not, I'm not doing the whole bizarre psychotherapy thing of blaming my dad for certain things. Right. But instead, I'm trying to learn lessons from that. But now I have this difficult walk to walk. Mm-hmm. I want my sons to know what I think. Yeah. But I also know that I put pressure on them. Right. Right. And
both are good. Yeah. And the not have a narrow view of masculinity means that you are flexible and agile in executing wisdom in your leadership. Yeah. You're knowing pressure, release, pressure, release.
And that sort of leadership requires conversation, lots and lots of conversation, and of both parties learning from each other.
Yeah, and these conversations don't have to be gay. Which I say that because the false gospel of our age is let's talk about it, let's express, let's converse. Right. But again, we need to rightly fight against that false gospel while not executing the actual beauty of lively, consistent, constant conversation.
Absolutely. And so, we also need to find pride when our sons do things differently and succeed.
Celebration.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of fathers struggle with, is celebrating their sons. And that's important. And that not only will make your sons more manly, it's a good example for the females in your life.
Boom. With that, let's sign it off and bring it home.
Okay.
You go first.
Right. I say, keep your trowel in hand.
Keep your gun rather loose in the holster.
So long, everybody.